Cradle-to-Career Advisory. So I'm now unmuted. Okay, thank you. It helps when I'm not muted. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to today's Cradle-to-Career Advisory Board Ad Hoc Committee meeting. I see that we have 5 of our 9 ad hoc committee members here with us today, which helped us establish our quorum. So thank you today to John and Javier, Ahmet, Tom, Jerry, and Robert for being here today. Unfortunately, we do have a few members that were not able to attend our meeting today. However, I would like to acknowledge them and thank them for their work. So that includes Marisol Avina, Patrick Perry, Jenny Cochran, and Catalina Fuentes. So while they weren't able to attend, they did all help with helping to read and score applications for our advisory boards. So here we are. I'll go ahead and do a brief overview of our meeting for today. The governing board recognized the importance of recruiting advisory board members with an expertise in equity and the importance of, including diverse voices through a structured approach in its selection of members. So with that intent, this ad hoc committee was put together and to develop a slate of candidates for each of the 2 advisory boards, and there are 2. The community engagement is one, and the other is data and tools. And so today for our meeting, we have 5 components or 5 items in our agenda today. The Office of Cradle-to-Career staff has been assisting the ad hoc committee with a lot of legwork. So today we'll hear from Sydney, who will walk us through the first 2 items on the agenda, which are the scope of the advisory boards and the candidate selection rubric. These 2 things are essentially the process that we're using. Third, we will hear from public comment. And then as for the last 2 agenda items, Marianne and I will go ahead and facilitate the discussion on an initial slate of candidates. And let's go ahead and start with Sydney. As always, I want to make sure that we're efficient with our time today, balancing the time for public comment, committee discussion, and getting to consensus so that we can take action. So I'll be sure to note when we're having a discussion for discussion purposes, when we actually get to a motion, time for a vote, that will be very clear. I'll hand it over to Sydney at this point.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Nice to see everyone. I'm Sydney Armendariz. I'm the C2C board liaison. So today I will just start us off with just giving some background information about the advisory board application process. It'll probably be a refresher for all of our committee members because you all just did this last week, but definitely wanted to give the public a chance to hear about the application process and to see what we've done. So I'll just start with talking about both of the advisory boards. So the first advisory board is the Data and Tools Board that will ensure that the data and tools provide actionable information and identifies ways to improve access to that information. So that's the first board. The second board is the Community Engagement Advisory Board. So that board will ensure that there are strong feedback loops with data users to support evidence-based decision-making, analytical capacity, and equitable access to actionable information. So both of these boards will have 16 members, and we expect them to meet on a regular basis, and they'll provide recommendations to the larger governing board about ways to improve the system, ways to improve access to the system, and also just making sure that the public and the community have a voice at the table during our governing board meetings as well. So the application process, we started off by developing the application and the scoring rubric based on the proposed activities of both advisory boards. Then we posted the application to the C2C website and asked our governing board members to send them out to their referral networks as well. And then we gave about a 2-week deadline to make sure that we gave enough time for folks to access the application, ask any questions they had, and then to submit their application and any supporting documents or anything like that. Then our C2C board chair, Amy Fong, and the C2C staff did just a preliminary review of applications just to make sure we had a diverse representation of candidates. So making sure we had people from higher ed, K through 12, the community advocacy groups, things like that. So we wanted to make sure that every sector was well represented in our candidate pool. And then where we're at now is the advisory board ad hoc committee, which is you all, reviewed the applications, I think about 2 weeks ago, leading up until today's meeting. Where we will go through your final slate of candidates and then make the recommendation to the governing board during the May 11th governing board meeting. And yes, so that's the last part is Amy, our C2C board chair, will present that recommendation to the governing board next month for a vote. So the applications that we received a total of 94 applications. 36 of those were for the Community Engagement Board, 57 were for the Data and Tools Advisory Board. And like I mentioned before, we received many applications from higher ed, K through 12 practitioners, advocacy groups, and community organizations. So it was really great to see that we had a diverse pool of candidates from the beginning, so we didn't even have to go out to recruit more applications. We got in a lot within that 2-week period. And then we at C2C, we divided the 9 board members, so the committee, into 3 groups. So each group reviewed a set of applications. So we didn't have to put 94 applications on each of you. We divided them up to give you each a section of the candidate pool. And so that means each application was read and scored by at least 2 of the ad hoc committee members. So now getting into what the boards will look like as far as representation. So for the Community Engagement Advisory Board, first, we recommend that we have at least 5 representatives from community organizations, 5 representatives from advocacy organizations, and 6 representatives from practitioners, giving us our 16. And we structured it this way to make sure that it's equitable across the board, but of course we can't divide 16 into 3 very well. So we did our best to make sure that we had equal representation from the community, from advocacy groups, and from practitioners, because this board specifically will focus on that public piece, that public voice, that public aspect of the C2C system. And staying on the Community Engagement Advisory Board, this is our rubric that we came up with. So I'll just go through the first column. I won't read the entire table, but the rubric consisted of having strong experience serving as an ambassador for a specific community or user group. We ask that the candidates have access to forums to work closely with community members to understand their needs that are relevant to C2C. And we also ask that candidates have experience supporting awareness of and access to student and educator tools, especially around college, career, and financial aid planning. We felt this was very important, just as I said earlier, to just make sure that the public has access to the system, that it works for them, as well as the researchers who will be using it as well. So that's the rubric in a nutshell for community engagement. And then moving to the Data and Tools Advisory Board. So this one, we recommended a little bit of a broader candidate pool. So we wanted 8 representatives from practitioners and at least 1 from each sector. So 1 from community colleges, 1 from K through 12, 1 from CSU, and 1 from UC. And as I mentioned, at least 1 from each of those sectors. We asked for at least one representative from students and families, 2 representatives from community organizations, 3 representatives from research organizations, and 2 from advocacy organizations. So again, because the Data and Tools Advisory Board is more specific to the actual research tools and practitioner tools, we felt it was necessary to have more representation from practitioners, but then of course also making sure that community and advocacy organizations have a seat at the table as well, to make sure we have a diverse group of opinions and expertise. So again, for the scoring rubric, I'll just look at the first column of this. So we asked for candidates to have experience conducting analyses using the data that will be included in the analytical tools. We asked that the candidate will help ensure that accurate and aligned data can be integrated into the analytical tools. And then we also asked that they have some familiarity with C2C relevant data sets and the way information is gathered and processed. And we asked for this because this advisory board will focus on the actual tools for researchers and practitioners. So we wanted to make sure that candidates have that relevant expertise to bring to the advisory board meetings. So Amy, I think this is you.
Yeah, so we'll take a minute we'll take some time to listen to public comment, but just to kind of give you a roadmap for the remainder of the meeting, we are going to be reviewing the slate of candidates. There will be some group discussion here about some of the items that may have come up or some things to take into consideration as we finalize the slates. I will then ask for a motion and of course a second in order to approve the recommendation of the slate of candidates. We'll move forward with an approval by majority vote of the ad hoc committee members present here today. And then we'll move into a second process where we associate term lengths for each of the members that are on that slate. So I think it's now time for public comment. And I'll start by reading the written comments that were submitted. Danielle is here with us today and she'll assist us with timing. Public comment is available for up to 2 minutes for those that are attending. So let me go ahead and start with the written comments that were submitted. So this first one was submitted by Andrew Keller. I'd like to submit a written comment for agenda item 4 for the April 26th meeting of the Cradle-to-Career Advisory Board Ad Hoc Committee meeting. I'm submitting these comments to the committee via email because I will be in Washington, D.C. at this date and time for CSBA's Coast to Coast Federal Advocacy Trip to meet with members of California members of Congress and other federal agency staff. My comments are submitted in reference to agenda item 4 regarding possible action on candidates for the Data and Tools Advisory Board. I would like to make the following 2 comments. As a candidate for this advisory board, I regret that I cannot attend this meeting in person to introduce myself under public comment. In my experience, selecting committee members that actually show up is the single most critical factor in the ability of a committee or board to be effective. I fully intend to participate in 100% of the meetings and activities of the advisory board if selected, and would openly welcome an opportunity to serve in a leadership capacity if appropriate. My application notes a preference of serving a 1-year term. However, I would like to note that I am open to serving a 2- or 3-year term. The intent of noting a 1-year preference is simply that it would be preferable as a way for me to better gauge my ability both to serve on a longer term basis and or to take a more deeply involved role if available during a brief 1-year term. The next public comment was submitted by California Competes. As organizations representing sectors in education, workforce, labor, business, and social justice, we write to respectfully urge your support for the appointment of Ana Alvarado to serve as a member of the Community Engagement Advisory Board. As you know, the Community Engagement Advisory Board will create strong feedback loops with data users to support evidence-based decision-making, analytical capacity, equitable access, and promote diversity and inclusivity in building engagement with the data system. Last year, Ms. Alvarado served as a member of the Cradle-to-Career Community Engagement Subcommittee, where she provided input and feedback on key outreach strategies, such as helping develop a clear understanding of target audiences, provided input on a communications plan that will raise awareness of the system, why it matters, and how to use it. Additionally, Ms. Alvarado provided recommendations to ensure community-based organizations are part of the outreach plan, ensure all communications to users are accessible and available in various languages, and provided input on strategies related to the use of social media and other outreach activities to better engage and inform the public. As Policy Director for the California EDGE Coalition, Ms. Alvarado represents a coalition of labor, business, education, social justice, and workforce development leaders with a focus on policies that advance economic mobility for adult learners, opportunity youth, workers, and employers. In her role, Ms. Alvarado spearheaded the content development and distribution of key messaging for the data system through informational webinars, news updates, and calls to action in order to raise awareness and engage the public in the decision-making process to establish the system. In addition to public outreach, Ms. Alvarado also led and participated in advocacy strategies to secure funding in the budget for the data system and educated policymakers, legislative staff, and the public on what the data system is and how it will provide communities with critical information to make decisions on college readiness, financial aid planning, employment and earnings outcomes, and pathways in career technical education that lead to degrees, certificates, and credentials. Most importantly, Ms. Alvarado brings with her lived experience as a first-generation college graduate, daughter of Mexican immigrant parents, and English language learner, born and raised in an underserved community in San Jose. She understands the barriers many students and immigrant communities face when seeking resources to access basic needs such as healthcare, food insecurity, internet access, student financial aid, all things that continue to impact individuals and working families across the state. Ms. Alvarado is passionate about continuing to advocate for tools that are accessible and understandable to help students, adult learners, and opportunity youth make informed decisions on their education and career planning, while also informing policymakers how to improve California's education and workforce systems. For these reasons, we know Ms. Alvarado will be instrumental to the advisory board, and we respectfully urge your support of her appointment. The next comment was submitted by the Institution for College Access and Success. They are members of the Cradle-to-Career Governing Board. On behalf of the Institute for College Access and Success, TICAS, I write to express our strong support for the appointment of Marshall Anthony Jr., PhD, to serve as a member of the Data and Tools Advisory Board. Mr. Anthony is a fierce supporter, fierce higher education advocate, and trained applied researcher who employs quantitative techniques to analyze real-world post-secondary issues and will bring a unique and valuable perspective to the advisory board's work. The Data and Tools Advisory Board has been charged with the task of helping to ensure that the Cradle-to-Career data tools provide actionable information to all stakeholders. TICAS, which works both nationally and in California and Michigan, is a trusted source of research, design, and advocacy for student-centered public policies that promote affordability, accountability, and equity in higher education. TICAS's deep roots in California, combined with its higher education data expertise, will help guide Mr. Anthony to provide unique strategic guidance in the development and governance of the data system. As TICAS research director, Mr. Anthony's work aims to integrate, complicate, and problematize systemic educational disparities to improve the educational and socioeconomic mobility of traditionally underrepresented communities. As a researcher with experience working at the Division of Florida Colleges, he knows how critical student data systems are to properly assess state-level education and workforce systems and address critical equity issues. He is passionate about advocating for data and tools that are accessible and understandable to help students, researchers, and policy make informed decisions about education and workforce systems. For these reasons, we know Mr. Anthony will be instrumental to the advisory board, and we respectfully urge your support of his appointment. For questions, please contact Angela Perry at aperry@ticas.org. Sincerely, Jessica Thompson, Vice President, the Institute for College Access and Success. The next public comment was submitted by Abraham Cicchetti, sorry. Good afternoon, members of the ad hoc committee. My name is Abraham Chichetti, and I am seeking consideration for the Community Engagement Advisory Board. I have worked in the healthcare higher education space for over 12 years as a servant leader. Additionally, I hold a bachelor's in business administration accountancy degree from Sacramento State University and a master of science in healthcare administration and leadership from UCSF. Through my experiences, I have seen many instances where a lack of usable student information has impacted equitable access to student services and interventions. As a father of 3, I am very aware of the information gap needed to support families with additional resources in supporting student success. Thus, I was excited to join the Research Agenda Subcommittee spearheaded by WestEd when the opportunity presented itself. Through the pandemic, I assisted in identifying parameters for research on long-term outcomes of early childhood services, school interventions, college readiness for high school students, and much more. Through this time, I found myself discussing the C2C mission and the initiatives with peers and various community leaders. With that said, I am requesting that you help me continue this passion by allowing me to serve on the community and support the C2C initiatives moving forward. I believe my experience and drive will prove to be invaluable. Thank you for your time and considerations. Please let me know if you have questions. Thank you. The next public comment was submitted by the California Higher Education Equity Coalition. Dear Cradle-to-Career Governing Board members, on behalf of the California Higher Education Equity Coalition, we write to express our strong support for a number of highly qualified candidates to the Cradle-to-Career Data and Tools Advisory Board and the Community Engagement Advisory Board. As leading organizations focused on educational opportunity and racial equity, we have come together to ensure that California state leaders have a laser focus on higher education access and success and the closure of racial and socioeconomic equity gaps. This requires that individuals appointed to California governing boards not only be reflective of the diverse students we serve across the state, but understand their unique needs and challenges. The Data and Tools Advisory Board has the duty of ensuring the data tools outlined within the system provide information that is actionable for practitioners and families. The Community Engagement Advisory Board will ensure access to the data system is both equitable and supports evidence-based decision-making by providing strong feedback loops in the development of the system. These two 16-member boards should consist of diverse appointees from across the state, representing individuals from various sectors, including research organization staff, advocacy organization staff, practitioners, students, and community organization staff. With these categories in mind, we strongly support the appointment of the following individuals to the Cradle-to-Career Advisory Boards, all of whom are reflective of the state's immense diversity. Data and Tools Advisory Board. Marshall Anthony Jr., PhD, the Institute of College Access and Success. TCAS. Liz Guillen, Esquire Public Advocates. Samantha C. Thompson, the Education Trust West. Vikash Reddy, PhD, the Campaign for College Opportunity. Community Engagement Advisory Board. Ana Alvarado, California Edge Coalition. Christopher Nellum, PhD, the Education Trust West. Sasha Perez, the Campaign for College Opportunity. Ada Viveros Walton, sorry about that. Public advocates. Advisory board members will be critical in shaping a successful cradle-to-career system, helping to ensure that the data tools provide actionable information and that the public can use these tools to support evidence-based decision-making. These tools have demonstrated These individuals have demonstrated commitment to improving educational access and quality for California students and will bring that valuable experience to these boards. We thank you for your leadership as you work to launch this historic data system to help more students reach their college and career goals. If you have any questions or would like to discuss or support further, please reach out to Katrina Linden, Senior Legislative Affairs Manager at the Campaign for College Opportunity at collegecampaign.org or 714-679-9402. Thank you for your consideration. California Higher Education Equity Coalition. Susan has Executive Director, California Competes, Brian Rivas, Senior Director of Policy and Government Relations, Education Trust West, Zima Creason, Executive Director, California Edge Coalition, Jessica Thompson, Vice President, the Institute for College Access and Success, TICAS, Jesse Ryan, Executive Vice President, Campaign for College Opportunity, Dana Viveras Walton, Director of Education, Higher Education Public Advocates. I do apologize for flubbing some of that. Danielle, who was our next public comment? Oh, I'm sorry.
So I think now we're going to go to folks in the room, and then after folks in the room, then we'll go to the folks on Zoom. So for you all on Zoom that are asking to submit public comment verbally, we will get to you right after we get to the folks here in the room, just for time's sake. So
thank you so much. Danielle will be helping us with timing. Yes. And our first public comment. Would you like a microphone?
I think I'm all right, unless the folks on Zoom might need one.
I think they're good.
Good.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Fede Viveros Walton and serve as Director of Higher Education at Public Advocates. I've submitted my name for your consideration for the Community Advisory Board. I'm a proud graduate of all three public segments. Proud community college student, transfer student to UC Berkeley, and my master's from San Francisco State University. I identify as a first generation Latino student, and I've dedicated my career to public service in education, workforce, and local government. Throughout my career, I've piecemealed data sources in order to create policy and programs that are responsive to the needs of the folks that we serve. My particular expertise is in P16 education policy and program development. I have worked to create and build on data systems to inform policy and practice improvements. I've also liked to elevate some of the other candidates that were on the California Higher Education Equity Coalition, specifically for the Community Engagement Board. That is Ana Alvarado from California Edge Coalition, Sasha Perez for Campaign for College Opportunity, and Chris Nellum from the Education Trust West, and of course myself, Fede Viveros Walton, Director of Higher Education at Public Advocates. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Fede. I'm so sorry for blowing your name.
It is quite all right. I respond to any iteration of that, so it's all right. Thank you.
Thank you. And is there anyone else in the room that would like to make public comment? No? Okay. Okay. So next we'll go to folks on the phone or on Zoom. And we'll start just in order from when we received your request. So Rachel, can you unmute Liz Guillen? I think that's Guillen, sorry. See, now I messed up names. From Public Advocates.
Yes, Liz should have the ability to unmute herself.
Okay. Liz, you can go ahead and unmute your line.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, ad hoc committee members. I'm Liz Guillen of Public Advocates. I'm here today to reinforce the candidacy of specific applicants to the Data and Tools Advisory Board, Dr. Marshall Anthony from TICAS, Samantha Thompson from the Education Trust West, Dr. Vikash Reddy from the Campaign for College Opportunity, all spotlighted in the letter from our coalition partners, and myself, Liz Guillen. I want to address a specific issue that has been raised for your discussion, and that is the qualification as an out-of-state candidate. I am an out-of-state candidate for the Data and Tools Advisory Board. I moved to New Mexico in anticipation of my retirement from Public Advocates, but then I changed my mind to retire as the pandemic working remotely. I believe that living out of state should not by itself be a disqualifier for the advocacy board because it would limit worthy candidates like me with much experience around the history and development of the Cradle-to-Career data system, and in my case, around teacher data for equitable access to the neediest students, as well as the needs of California's most marginalized students and families. I urge you to support the idea that out-of-state candidates are worth any additional expense or time, even if just for the first year or two of the system's launch. In the case of advisory boards that are not themselves making policy decisions, it makes sense to draw relevant California policy expertise where one can find it. And that key criteria should be the candidate's California policy expertise, not where we are currently residing. My over 30 years of advocacy with Public Advocates, and before then, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, have all been focused on the equitable access to educational opportunities to learn by the most vulnerable communities in the state. Finally, our collective pandemic experience is that out-of-state participation is valuable, especially by those with experience of California students and communities, and of especially those most marginalized and impacted by the lack of access to information and resources during the data system's work in its early years. I think my own experience rises to that level, and I hope you will add me to your recommended slate. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay, the next person is Alejandra Acosta. So we'll give Regil a moment to get Alejandra on the panel list.
Hi all, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Awesome, thank you. Good afternoon all, my name is Alejandra Acosta and I'm a senior policy and research analyst at California Competes, Higher Education for a Strong Economy. Thank you for the opportunity to give public comment and reemphasize our support for candidates. On behalf of California Competes, Higher Education for a Strong Economy, I would like to voice my support for the following candidates to the Data and Tools Advisory Board: Marshall Anthony Jr., PhD from the Institute of College Access and Success, or TICAS; Liz Guillen, Public Advocates; Samantha Thompson from the Education Trust West; and Vikash Reddy, PhD from the Campaign for College Opportunity. I would also like to express my support for the following candidates to the Community Engagement Advisory Board: Ana Alvarado from the California EDGE Coalition; Christopher Nellam, PhD from the Education Trust West; Sasha Perez from the Campaign for College Opportunity; and Speida Viveros Walton from Public Advocates. These candidates possess the diversity, expertise, and skills needed to successfully serve on these boards. Thank you for your consideration and the opportunity again to give public comment and reemphasize our support for these candidates.
Thank you. Okay, next up we have Angela Perry. Angela, you can unmute yourself so we can hear you.
All right, can folks hear me now?
Yes.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Good afternoon, members of the Ad Hoc Committee. My name is Angela Perry, Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Institute for College Access and Success, TICAS. Thank you so much for the updates that were shared this afternoon and for the opportunity to offer comments before the following discussion about the potential advisory board candidates. As you already heard, TICAS strongly supports Dr. Marshall Anthony Jr.'s application to the Data and Tools Advisory Board and believe that he will contribute significantly to the creation of the data system and to representing a diverse population of students. On behalf of the California Higher Education Equity Coalition, I'd also like to express our support for the following additional candidates to the Data and Tools Advisory Board, Liz Guillen from Public Advocates, Samantha Thompson from the Education Trust West, and Dr. Vikash Reddy from the Campaign for College Opportunity. I'd also like to offer support for the following members of the Community Engagement Advisory Board: Anna Alvarado from the California Ed Coalition, Dr. Christopher Nellam from Ed Trust West, Sasha Perez from the Campaign for College Opportunity, and Spede Viveros Walton from Public Advocates. These candidates all possess expertise and skills that will be needed to successfully serve on these boards and will bring a diversity of experience and perspective that will benefit the Cradle-to-Career Governing Board as well as the state of California. I really appreciate your consideration and your time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Raquel Morales. And Raquel, you can go ahead and unmute yourself so we can hear you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, perfect.
Perfect, thank you. Hello, my name is Raquel Morales, and I'm here on behalf of the Education Trust West to voice support for Samantha Thompson's appointment to the Data and Tools Advisory Board and Dr. Christopher Nellam's appointment to the Community Engagement Advisory Board. As a member of the Merced County Office of Education's Early Education Leadership Team for 15 years, Samantha has a depth of knowledge in early care and education data that will significantly contribute to the advisory board and planning for the incorporation of early learning data into the C2C system. Dr. Nellam's depth and breadth for knowledge of and community-centered approach to higher education will meaningfully inform the ways the system can center the needs of all stakeholders, particularly those of students, families, and communities of color. They have both been strong education advocates and would be a great addition to the respective boards. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Next, we have Jackie Nevarez. Sorry if I mispronounced your name.
Hello, my name is Jackie Nevarez. Thank you so much to the advisory board members for having me here today. As a child of a foster youth and a first generation student from a rural town in Tennessee, I made my first trip out to California when I was 15, and I immediately fell in love with the diversity and wanted to make this diversity a part of my life. So upon graduating from high school, I made action plans and moved to California. And I've been able to say that I proudly have been a product of the California education system, both educationally and professionally, meaning that I've attended 2 of our California community colleges and 2 of our California state universities to achieve my master's, both of my masters. However, I've also participated at the high school K through 12 level in 4 different school districts: Los Angeles Unified School District, San Juan Unified School District, Sacramento City Unified School District, and currently as a college and career pathways counselor in Elk Grove Unified School District. And one of the things that I believe that I can bring to the team is a holistic approach. As I said, that I do have 2 masters. One is in marriage, family, childcare, and one is in school counseling. I actually did have a very extensive career when I was serving as a therapist, as well as a counselor in the world of marriage, family, childcare. I was able to be fortunate when I was at California State University Northridge to serve on several National Institute of Mental Health projects where I was published. I also became a behavior analyst at River Oak Center for Children here locally. I've also served as a county foster parent and as a counselor for youth group homes in our area. So I think that having that holistic approach of really being able to understand the mental health components that are so crucial in Cradle to Career really give me some unique insights that I would like to be able to share with my state. Furthermore, I also have served as the Cradle to Career Community Engagement Subcommittee member during our foundational times. I actually attended as a guest and was asked to, to be promoted as a member because of my extensive knowledge with California College Guidance Initiative and specifically californiacolleges.edu. I'm an expert in californiacollege.edu platform, and I've often used as a modeling for their videos, recently presented with them for the California Student Aid Commission's Affordability Summit, as well as with Assemblymember McCarty's AB 469 financial aid workshops. And I
Thank you,
really
Jackie.
believe,
Your time limit has been reached.
thank you.
Okay, next we'll have Darcy Harvey.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Darcy Harvey, and I'm submitting for the Data and Tools Advisory Board. I work as an independent consultant in higher education in California, and I feel like I have a unique perspective as I've worked with both nonprofits, higher education organizations, as well as with the California Community College Chancellor's Office. And I have worked with data in various formats, both national data sets, California data sets, and internal MIS data sets from the California Community College Chancellor's Office. So I think I could bring some experience to this advisory board and share some of the cross-sector issues that arise from lack of data. And I hope to be able to share my knowledge with you on this board. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and we have Josh Hagan.
Great. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity to provide comment today and for your leadership on the board. My name is Joshua Hagan. I'm the Policy Director for the Campaign for College Opportunity. We're also a member of the California Higher Education Equity Coalition. I'd like to echo the written comments supported for candidates recommended by that California Higher Education Equity Coalition. For the sake of brevity, I won't read that whole list of names again as it's already been read for the record, but would like to voice our strong support for all of those individuals who are listed. Specifically, I would like to highlight a few individuals from within that list, just as they are members of the Campaign for College Opportunity team. For the Data and Tools Advisory Board, Vikash Reddy, PhD, and then for the Community Engagement Advisory Board, Sasha Perez. We believe that Vikash Reddy and Sasha Perez, alongside the other candidates already mentioned by the California Higher Education Equity Coalition, have a demonstrated commitment to improving educational access and quality for California students, and will bring that valuable experience to these boards. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. And next we have Trent Kajikawa. Forgive me if I mispronounced your name. And you can unmute yourself, Trent, so we can hear you.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to comment. My name is Trent Kajikawa, currently a data scientist with the Common App, a popular college application platform designed for first year and transfer applicants. Just want to reiterate and emphasize my dedication to the state of California. I know we are a national organization, but currently reside in the city of Torrance. I've been nearly a lifelong resident of the state of California, volunteer in my free time with a lot of at-risk, underprivileged, underserved youth in the college application process. I do believe I bring a unique set of data background regarding admissions data, specifically thinking about their transition from high school to college. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And I don't see any other requests for public comment. If anyone else would like to make public comment, I'll give you about 10 or 15 more seconds to submit that request through the Q&A on Zoom, and then we can unmute your line. So this is the last call for public comment. Okay, seeing none, we can go ahead and close the public comment period.
Thank you, Sydney, for helping us to facilitate that. It's certainly been nice to see such robust participation from public and voicing support for this particular project. So next up is discussion and possible action on candidates. I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Marianne to help us get started with looking at slate candidates.
Yes, so just a couple of big picture comments before we dive into the heart of this meeting. So first of all, I wanted to thank all of you on the ad hoc committee for all of the work that you did leading up to today. You needed to review 94 thoughtful and detailed applications for only 32 slots. And you were weighing how to reflect a diversity of perspectives and experiences, which is not an easy task. One thing I wanted to reflect on before we get started is that part of what we're working through, especially here in the early days, is how we as the office can support the governing board with the things that are your responsibility. And one thing that's very clear in the legislation in AB 132 is that the governing board appoints the advisory boards. So as we thought about the process, we as staff aim to provide structure that would help you with your review, right? With the dividing up the applications into categories, creating the rubric, the scoring templates, to help you structure your review, but really wanted you to be the ones who are taking these decisions and choosing who will be on the advisory boards. So one quick thought, we will have the opportunity to fill a third of these spots a year from now. There will be staggered terms. We have far more applications than we will be able to select today. And I just wanted to highlight that possibility, as well as other ad hoc committees, task forces, less formal engagement with our work. So there are lots of opportunities to engage. We're going to start in a moment by discussing a few questions in the abstract before we then go to discussion of the slate of the candidates that emerged from averaging your individual scores. So we'll show you, here's the default slate that emerged when we averaged the rankings you submitted in advance. And then you can consider if you want to make any improvements to the slate. So for example, you can consider new information received during the public comment today if you choose to. You can also consider the work that you and your colleagues who aren't present here today did in carefully reviewing and scoring the applications previously. Just a few more big picture thoughts. Try not to be too long-winded before we get in. When we saw that more than 90 applications came in, we as the staff really wrestled with how to best proceed and just wanted to acknowledge that we're aiming to make this process as transparent as possible. So we are going to start by sharing back the average scores from your individual scoring process. We as staff didn't predefine a slate for you to then simply confirm in a public meeting. You did the work here over the past few weeks. Again, I want to thank, as Amy already mentioned, especially Catalina Cifuentes, Debbie Cochran, Mara Solovina, and Patrick Perry, who are members of this ad hoc committee, but were not able to be here in person today. I also want to acknowledge it can be hard and awkward to do this work in a public meeting. I just want to say that out loud because it's important for us to acknowledge, but it's incredibly important, I think, for the work of Cradle-to-Career that the planning process and all the work that led to this benefited so much from being done in public meetings with a lot of public input, and that's what we're doing here today. And just to speak for a moment to the public who are here, and those of you who are dialing in via Zoom, thank you so much for caring about this work and for taking the time to be a part of it. We're really excited to seat the advisory boards. And for those of you who applied or who shared public comment today recommending a candidate, thank you. And would love to ask you to please stay engaged, even if we're not able to offer you a slot today or your preferred candidate isn't able to be selected in this round. We really need your involvement in our work overall, and we really hope that you will reapply in future rounds and stay engaged in other ways. And thank you for showing us grace during this process as we work through this. This is our first time sitting advisory boards, and we're going to close out today by reflecting on what lessons we've learned from this process that we can then learn from next year as well. So that's kind of some big picture thoughts. And now we'll talk about a few overarching questions. Oh, yeah.
So it sort of reminded me of yesterday's discussion, because yesterday we had a discussion on the governance manual. We're finalizing edits for the next version that will be submitted for the board meeting coming up. And one of the things that I wanted to point out is that the advisory boards are under the same sort of umbrella as the board members themselves. So they will be subject to filing of Form 700. For example, they are subject to the conflict of interest policy that we've all agreed to and things of that nature. So it's certainly possible that, once we come up with a slate of candidates, there might be someone who has, wants to step back and, the alternate may then take their place. So just in my head, I was just, kind of thinking about this idea of, we want to do good work here, we obviously have the opportunity to seat another round of candidates in a year. So this isn't the end. Of course, this idea of, I think the idea of grace and not putting that pressure of getting to perfect today, to kind of keep that in your minds. And what we want to do is to do good work. Thank you. Sorry.
So I think we're ready to go to some two high-level questions. We can do that. Yes. So if we can go to the next slide. All righty. So, way up.
So as we go through this discussion, so this is not the voting part. This is here are some things to think about. And these things I think came up as we were working with the list of candidates and just seeing how the different candidates sort of bubbled up. The first question is, how might we be inclusive, say, of voices who are not currently represented on the governing board while considering also these applications that we've received from individuals who work directly from an office that's currently represented by the governing board? How might we feel about that? Any thoughts?
Some context.
Sure.
Maybe just a bit of context on this. So we raised this question after receiving, I believe, about 7 applications, primarily in the data and tools application from staff who are in offices or organizations that are currently represented on the board. So we thought it'd be helpful to just consider this question before we dive into the slate. And the staff recommendation was to kind of consider the mix. So the purpose of the advisory boards is to provide recommendations to the governing board. So we just to think about how many of the slots, or for you to consider how many of the slots would be appropriate for staff of governing board members. So this was a question we wrestled with, but also want to acknowledge we didn't anticipate this as a question prior to putting out the application, and provided no guidance, either pro or con, in the application, either encouraging or discouraging applications from staff of current governing board member organizations. So this is just a question that came up and thought it'd be helpful to discuss before we dive in.
Thanks for providing that context. So any thoughts? Sure. Pros and cons?
So we should generally discourage that type of thing. The organizations that want to organize on a governing board. And I would add that we end up potentially getting in the middle of a conversation, discussion, argument within those organizations. Right. So those organizations already have official representation on the board, but it's selected by those organizations to represent that board. And if we have different members of that organization come, they may be coming with a different agenda that has not been agreed upon and surface to that organization. So I think there are some potential challenges for us as the governing board if we end up within, in the middle of an intra-organizational conversation.
I concur with John. On the one hand, there could be potential technical expertise that they bring to the table that may not necessarily be surfaced to the governing board, but on the other hand, we've got 90 applicants where we want to try to achieve as much representation throughout the state as possible. So that's yet another reason, I think, why we should err on the side of discouraging current member governing board institutions from having staff members also participate as advisory board members. It also creates a really awkward situation, in my view, where we've got certain institutions that could potentially have greater influence over decision making at the governing board level due to the fact that the recommendations that would come from the advisory board are shaped by additional members from those institutions. I think we want to encourage a situation where, to John's point, internally, the institutions and their members are deliberating on their sort of united front of what they want to present and then work from there.
And I'll just interject really quickly. Before you start speaking, if you can just identify yourself for folks on the phone. My apologies for not giving you that disclaimer before we got into the discussion. There's a camera right there, but they can't really see people's lovely faces. So if you can just say your first and last name and your organization, that'd be great.
Javier Romero from EDD. I just concur there. Said these subcommittees is yes, opportunity to make a deep dive, but also kind of thinking outside the box and bring our organizational lens to the conversations. This is an opportunity to get a broader view and outside of how we operate, and something for the committee to grapple with thereafter.
Thank you. I do have a comment here from Debbie Cochran, who is part of our ad hoc committee, who was unable to be here today. So I'll go ahead and read her comment or her note. She says, I do not fully agree with the suggestion to the extent that staff's participation in a committee means contributing as a member of the public. Since some offices are quite large, such that the ad hoc committee member may have different expertise than the board member, an alternative might be to provide additional scoring points to an applicant, to individual applicants whose employers is not already represented, which should increase the likelihood of duplication, but not rule it out entirely. Somewhat of a little bit different perspective, a way to maybe consider the application, right, without outright rejecting it. Jerry?
Jerry Winkler, Department of Education. I would agree with that. I think it's important to be inclusive of voices outside the governing board, but on the other side, I think it's also important in these advisory boards to have some boots on the ground expertise from some of the practitioners, so that we're not forwarding maybe some of the recommendations of the advisory board to the governing board, and at that point getting a wake-up call as to maybe some things that aren't going to work. So I think as close to the ground as we can get, let's get the expertise in there.
All right, so all good points. Tom.
Yeah, Tom Vu with AICCU. I generally agree that we want to maximize the diversity that the applicants have brought. They bring different perspectives. As was mentioned before, and I mean the group that had sent in their applications, it's a great group. They're all very well qualified. But I don't think it should, just because they work for an entity that's already on the governing board, I don't think that we should automatically, not consider them. Maybe on a case-by-case basis, or just give them a closer look. But somehow stress, them not being from a group that is already on the governing board, give them extra consideration if that's the case.
Great, thank you. So I think that we have really a good discussion here, and an expression of values, right? Reconfirming this desire to have a diverse advisory board, to also to be inclusive where we can be, some additional outside expertise, and say not to penalize or reject outright candidates who already have perhaps representation on the governing board. So thank you for that discussion. So we'll go ahead and move on to the second bullet here. And as you may have heard earlier in today during the public comment section, this is how this bullet sort of arose, right? So how should we handle applications from out-of-state candidates given quorum requirements for in-person meetings and some restrictions for reimbursement for out-of-state travel as an Marianne, do you have any context to offer us on this one?
Sure. So this is another question that we didn't anticipate. And again, we provided no guidance one way or the other in the application process. So this was a learning opportunity for us as well. What we're referencing, so I just wanted to flag, in case you're not familiar, there is Assembly Bill 1887, where the state of California has prohibited state-funded travel to states with discriminatory laws. And if you look at the oag.ca.gov website, there are 18 states that are listed on that list, where the state of California will not reimburse travel to those states. So I just wanted to make you aware of that if you're not already aware of that. So there may be some complications in the future if the governing board decides to select advisory board candidates who are both out of state and from some of the states, we would not be able to provide reimbursement for travel. I think the one other consideration to just keep in mind is that the advisory boards are subject to Bagley-Keene, which, as you know from being here today, now require in-person meetings. So it would require a commitment from people, whether they're in the far reaches of the state of California or outside of California, to travel in person to meetings. If they're not able to do so, it makes it harder to achieve quorum. So I think those are just the background considerations.
What my meeting teacher was, if we had a hard time identifying the expertise needed, then that would justify the additional costs required. The fact that we have plenty of expertise. That's just my nature as an administrator and myself.
Thank you, Javier.
John has California Community Colleges. So I have a point of clarification. So for the other 31 states, California would reimburse their travel to and from the advisory board if they're not from one of the prohibited states.
My understanding is that we could do so, but that it is a bit more complicated, that we need to go through a few extra steps for that. Sydney, do you want to do
Yeah, just to build off what Marianne said, yes, it probably would require clearance from the governor's office. It would be like an out-of-state travel request that would go through the governor's office and potentially like government operations agency. So it would just require more steps and more time to get that approved, and then even then it might not be approved. Yes, especially in the age of Zoom meetings and team meetings and things like that. The state hasn't really been very accepting of travel right now due to the pandemic.
Usually you're designated a certain number.
Exactly. So there's still a lot of questions around that.
So even for the other 31 states, there would be potential questions about whether or not they still would be able to reliably.
Yes.
It sounds like.
Yeah.
Tom, you had a comment?
Yeah. Tom with AICCU. I'm trying to find that list of states. Would someone happen to know that or have that available? And second question is, the ad hoc committee, I'm sorry, the advisory committees have to meet in person.
Yes. Yes, in addition to lovely Form 700, signing up, home address and details of that.
If it's an investment. Yes, Form 700 has its own complexities, but yes, we would need a quorum of the advisory board to be here in person. So I'm looking at Ron, 16, so that's 9 of 16 would need to be here in person for a meeting to take place. Now, the advisory boards are not voting on things in the same way that the governing board does. So the governing board needs to have 2/3 of the members present to be able to get to a 2/3 vote on things. We don't have that restriction for the advisory boards, but we would need to have 9 members present in person for a meeting to take place.
John Hans, California Community Colleges. Again, I have another small question, maybe a question for Ron. So if we have members from other states on our advisory board, do other states' regulations for government appointments start to potentially apply if there's conflicts?
Excuse me, Member Heads, you're asking about whether an ethical or conflict of interest requirement in different jurisdiction might conflict.
So if there are other requirements related to serving on boards in other states, that might conflict with Californians. Is that something that could come up, or would ours just receive theirs?
That's a great issue to spot. I'm not licensed to practice law in any other jurisdictions except Maryland. I'd have to dig into that, but that's great. I hadn't even considered that issue.
If I may, there was a comment in the chat that requested clarification on travel to versus from the states that was on the list for Assembly Bill 1887. I just want to acknowledge that I think there are a lot of questions related to out-of-state travel that we don't know the answers to yet at this moment. So we would be happy to explore that further if that's helpful to the ad hoc committee.
All right, once again, we do have a note from our ad hoc committee member, Debbie Cochran, who was unable to attend. Her note says, if allowable, I would say out-of-state candidates are eligible to participate if they are able to cover their own costs. And thinking about, how might we help those additional voices. All right, so it looks like no further comments on this discussion questions. We can go ahead and move on. Okay, so I think what we're ready to do in a moment is to show you, we're going to start with the Community Advisory Board. We'll do that one first. So what we thought we would do is display on the screen in a minute. We'll show you a spreadsheet that displays the results of the average rankings that you all submitted in advance. So I'll walk through it in a moment. What I thought we could do is just show it on the screen and take about a 5-minute, if we want to call it a recess or we just take 5 minutes for you to have time to absorb the information on the screen, since you haven't seen this yet, compare it to your notes that you took when you were reviewing the applications. So you can just kind of take time to absorb and read, as opposed to immediately jumping into the discussion. So we thought we'd take about 5 minutes for that. And then after the 5 minutes, we can start discussing questions related to the slate of candidates. So let me just give Sydney a moment. Could you go over to community engagement, please?
Give me 1 second to try to make this a little bit bigger for everyone. And if you need me to scroll down, just
okay. So we can zoom in and out as needed for you to be able to see it, but just to walk through what you're looking at. So we have the first and last names of the candidates, and we took the number of slots that Sydney discussed at the beginning and put kind of a box around that and put those names in green. So if you look, you have the organization, and then the number under average rank is the average of the rankings that you submitted. And then you can see what category they're in. In blue below it are a couple of runners up. So these are the people whose ranking scores were closest. In some cases, there were ties, and we show you a couple of options. We also, in the farther column, show the geographic reach described in the applications. This is the staff's best guess at the geographic reach of their work based on the application materials. And then in the farther columns, you'll see preferred term limits. Let's not worry about those right now. We recommend doing this in 2 stages because people indicated they didn't have a strong preference on term limits. So let's pick the 16 people first. After we've done that, then we'll get to the term lengths and see what we can do on that. So any clarifying questions on what's visible? And maybe we can just take a 5-minute pause. I think we'll stay in session, is that right?
Well, let's go ahead. We can stay in session unless there's an urgent need to break.
May I ask a question, Marianne? So the rank isn't the score based on the points. It's another ranking based on it's like another figure.
That's correct. Okay. So because people scored the candidates and then they filled out a Google form. Thank you for asking this clarifying question. The ad hoc committee members then filled out a Google form where they were able to select their first, second, third, fourth choice within each category. So if someone was a first choice ranked by a member, then that was assigned 1 point, et cetera. And then that was then averaged. So what you see in the column is an average of the rankings that were done based on the scoring rubric that people provided.
If they weren't ranked, is there- what's the-
So for those who were not selected, we assigned a value equal to one more. So in other words, if you had the choice of doing 5, then everyone who was not selected received a value of 6. So essentially think of it as tied for, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so we will stay in session as we take a few minutes here to absorb the content on the screen, and if there's clarifying questions that can be raised to help with understanding the overall view here.
And I just scroll down so you can see the advocacy organization representatives. Let me know if you'd like me to scroll up or down as well, or sideways too. Keep going, or is that good? Okay.
So how do we feel about the slate of candidates generally? And then it was on the slide prior, we want to think about geographic reach, the categories, the distribution, right, of the individuals. Any comments or thoughts? You know, just kind of focusing on the green for right now.
I have one small concern. It's Don has California Community Colleges. I know this wasn't one of the rules for community engagement slate, but for the practitioners, there isn't a CSU practitioner representative. So I'm not sure that's something that we could change for the slate, but I just wanted to note that since CSU reference today. So I wanted to make sure to flag that that's a possible concern there. So one of the things we might want to think about if we go with the slate is setting up at least one of the maybe K-12, since they would have 3 as a 1-year term, and then encouraging the CSU board member to solicit more applications from his system.
Thank you so much, John, for seeing that and flagging it for the group. It's important to note, and I think that that was a great suggestion to think about, future terms and what might we do to bring in co-secondary in that way. Tom, sorry.
Close enough, 1 syllable. No, I agree with John. That was going to be one of my comments too, actually, was, just looking at the practitioners, UC, CSU, K-12 are represented, different aspects of K-12 as well, from the county office to the school district. But, there's a CSU representative on here. And, I would like to see that person be considered a bit more strongly.
All right, how do we feel about the candidates that are in blue, the alternates, the potential for, would bringing any of those up into the game, would that improve the slate at all? Or do we like the green?
Unless I missed something by one of the, we're missing like LA. So it's sort of Bay Area. And it's something.
Can we do practitioners?
Put on the advocacy.
LA and Bay Area usually.
What are we considering again?
I was asking if bringing any of the ones in blue up into the green, trading somebody out, would that improve the slate at all? Or do we like the green?
The Javier, I didn't complete the top. Audience was there, and not in the blue.
Oh, yes.
So I keep in mind, I triggered the thought that we didn't have that line.
Can we move it up a little bit?
Yes.
To see the communication community, yeah. If I can express a thought,
Yes, Tom.
I'm familiar with the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. I think they bring a very interesting perspective to the discussion of education. They perhaps can offer a business perspective, a workforce perspective to this discussion and to their outreach in for communications needs. So I just wanted to throw that out there for folks to consider.
Without making changes to the green.
Robert Gordon from Revival Strategy. I think it is really critical to ensure that we have CSU representation. Given that we have one candidate in the practitioner area who is from a CSU, I think we have to consider inclusion of that candidate into the mix.
This is Tom, if I can ask a question.
Yes.
That I think is on everyone's mind, but perhaps I just don't want to ask it, but what's the process of, say, taking a name out of the green and replacing it with someone in?
Yes, that's what I was asking. Would bringing somebody from the blue and putting them into the green, would that improve our slate? So I think we've kind of talked around it, but we haven't said, let's take this name from the blue and put them up into the green. So we have a suggestion. Are we all looking at Brian Bedford?
I mean, if you need someone to be the bad guy and make the suggestion, yes, I would suggest that we add Brian Bedford up to the practitioner. And do you need me to say who I would replace that person?
Right. I think what we're trying to do is to figure out how might we make this 16, right? Not 17.
Right. I don't want to be viewed as a bad guy, but if I have to, then then I would suggest perhaps replace Lauren Asher with Brian Bedford.
How do you feel about that?
Visalia is Tulare County, correct? You have 2 KP-12 organizations. Page. Alternative is dropping Lisa Rodriguez down. And for now, that's an alternative to KP-12 southern part of the central.
Realize we didn't talk about the mechanics of how do we display this as we go. So Sydney can make changes to this in real time if you would like her to. And then I think would it be helpful if we foreshadow the process a little bit? And so the next step, what I think to answer Tom's question would be, if once you feel like you have a slate that you think reflects what we would like for community engagement, then someone could advance a motion to say, we would like to proceed with the following slate as currently displayed, and then you would vote based on that. So that's kind of the mechanics. I think we had imagined this question of, do we want to move any names being resolved via conversation? So I suppose an alternative would be if anyone said, no, I like the current slate, you could advance the motion now to vote on that. Or if you'd like to say, I'd like to propose making the following change, replacing this name with that name, and then after that proposing a vote. Is that helpful? Do we need any further clarification on process?
Yeah, so the way that I heard it was that it sounded like there was a desire to move Brian Bedford up, but what we haven't resolved is who we would bring out. I think Javier had the last suggestion on who to bring out, is that right?
Yes. My suggestion was just because of geography.
Right.
Huge Visalia, Lisa Rodriguez now.
Did you share with us what that would look like?
There was another suggestion too. So we have 2 names.
Oh, we have 2. Okay.
So Lauren Asher, I think, was one, and then Lisa Rodriguez was the second. So
Okay.
there are 2 names that are up to have Brian Bedford replace them.
And I would agree with Tom with the Lauren Asher replacing.
Thank you. And that was Jerry, just for those who are dying.
All right. Any objections to removing Laura Asher, bumping her down, and pulling Brian up? All right, let's go ahead and make that change. And originally, I think that we were thinking to advance the slate of 16. But potentially what we could do is to go ahead and advance the 16 with alternates. Right, so we don't sort of lose all of our hard work here. And if that is, that's amenable, then I think that we can move on.
That form, I think, is John, that's helping me tell, but it should be first.
Thank you. So as adjusted, how does this look now? We've got Lauren in the first alternate position and Brian brought up into.
Robert Tagore, the revival strategy. I concur with this list as it is right now amended. As well as with the motion to have potential alternates, because who knows? I mean, when we get down to brass tacks,
yeah,
it could very well be the case that some of the preferences for terms don't align. But I think the importance of having CSU representation, which is the crux of this decision, is really critical to uplift and highlight, because it's one of the key partners in this work. We need to ensure that that institution is represented when we start discussing, the community engagement work from a practitioner's perspective.
Yeah. Are we able to switch back over to the slide deck so that we can review the motion?
Yeah. Should we get another?
I thought that we were okay with this. Okay. Yeah. All right. Can we switch over to the other slide deck?
Okay.
All right, so we do have a draft motion available. Now that we've sort of gone through the discussion and sort of gotten the slate to where we like it, what I had just recently suggested sort of on the fly. So this motion doesn't include that piece of forwarding the slate along with the alternates. So Cindy, if you wouldn't mind helping us make an adjustment to the motion here. Present the slate of 16 candidates and alternates.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Ron, would you advise using the term alternates or runners up in terms of clarification? What would you advise?
Thank you.
Which of the two?
Given that alternates appears in the board manual and refers to something else, might be a better term as you suggest.
Runners up. Okay, thank you.
So just for clarification, we'll say runners up to clarify that this would be someone who would take the place if someone else says, I don't want to be on the board. It would not be an alternate who steps in on a meeting by meeting basis or anything like that.
So, happy to entertain additional edits to this, and if it looks good to somebody, happy to entertain somebody to forward a motion.
Music doesn't take the number of runners up, because that implies it's 16 candidates and runners up. One per or two per.
We have a total of 6 runners up right now, 3 in one category, 2 in another, and 1 in the third. Would we like to just say six runners up?
So what we're doing is including the named, right? So that we don't have to have them listed as part of the agenda.
Okay, so the 6 named runners, yeah. Would that clarify it? Thank you for that clarification.
Perfect. We're at the voting part. Somebody would like to forward a motion.
I'm very well with you for the moment.
Thank you, Javier. With the first, do we have a second?
Robert Tagorda, Revival
Robert with the
Strategy. Second.
And now we'll go ahead and do a roll call vote. Sydney, if you could help us tally the votes.
Okay, let's see. So first I'll start with Jerry. How do you vote?
Yes.
Thomas who? Sorry.
Yes.
Robert Tagorda,
Yes.
John Hetz,
Yes.
Javier Romero,
Yes.
and the votes are in. We have 5 yes votes.
All right, so we have 5 yes votes in the room, and that means we have no no's, no abstentions, and no yes with reservations. So the ayes have it, the motion carries. Thank you very much. Now we get to move on to talking about the terms. Thank you. So for this, if you can scroll over, some people indicated a preferred term limit and some did not. What we proposed, the process we're suggesting, but would appreciate your input, is that for those who designated a preferred term limit, if it's not more than 6 in one category, we go with that. And then we draw names out of the hat to determine the other term limits. Would that process work for all of you? Okay, so Sydney, if you can help by scrolling, let's first count. I think we have the most in terms of 3-year term limits. So it looks like we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people who preferred a term limit of 3 years. So we could just let those 6 people have a 3-year term. And then proceed to see how many we need to have 5 in 2-year terms and 5 in 1-year terms. Is that a process that you think works well? An alternative would be that we decide we don't want to take anyone's preferences into consideration and we randomly assign all term limits using a random number generator in the spreadsheet. Does anyone have a preference on either of those?
Yeah, Robert Tagorda, Revival Strategy. I think it's important to take their preferences into account because we don't want to create a situation where we assign them a term to which they disagree. And then we're back at the drawing board looking for candidates. I mean, we spent so much time just getting to this slate now. We might as well, I think, take into account what their preferences are and then see where it lands initially and then determine the rest.
Okay, great. So any objections to that?
I have one objection, John Hetz, California Colleges, and my objection is pretty small. And it's just that if we have, given that the candidates are ranked, if we have a bunch of candidates who are at the bottom of our rankings and they have preferences for 3-year terms, I'm not sure we want to, like, that might be a good circumstance in which we might want to offer a lower term. And then they can, I assume, reapply subsequently. But you know, I have some concerns about as we've gotten to the bottom, and they were at the bottom of everyone's ranking.
Joyce Wells. So one point of clarification to just consider. For example, under practitioners, we received a large number of applications. So even those who are considered low would have a lower ranking number in this spreadsheet. We're still selected by multiple members. So we're not viewing all of the applications here. We're just viewing the top ranked ones. So just something to consider. One follow-up question. If you want to put more or less weight on the candidates' preferences based on where they are in the rankings, do you have a suggestion for where the cutoff should be or how to do that in a kind of
I can come up with some algorithms quickly. You know, there are ways we can balance it. Like the way I would think about it is, if you look within the categories, there were some candidates that look pretty different in terms of how we all rank them compared to the other sets of candidates. And so you might be able to see that type of break and use that meaningfully.
So I wonder, I'm just thinking out loud here, might there be any process improvements we could think about for next year? I think one thing I'm trying to consider is that we did put out an application where we said, what's your preference? And didn't kind of in advance think about how that would factor into the probability, like whether it factors into whether you're selected or
how the rankings would interact with that. Might it be possible to think about an algorithm for next year for future pieces, or how I think the balance is thinking about the issue you raised with the simplicity of saying we can accommodate the preferences today and go with that.
I'm absolutely, the John Head's covering community college is absolutely fine with accommodating their preferences. It's just there were some candidates that stood out to me as apparently different. And I don't think we'll need to do this in the future, if I'm understanding right, because they'll all be 3-year terms, right?
That's correct, yes, because we only need to start, that's right. The first and second year terms are only relevant this year and next.
Robert Tavoy to Revival Strategy. I think one other point to consider for the group is we don't want to put ourselves in a precarious situation where, for example, we were talking about a CSU candidate, and we run into a situation where after a year, we're looking for another CSU candidate, and it's the one seat that gets vacated. So that's my only other, I think one other consideration here, even though my general preference is to accept the preferences stated by the candidates, I think we have to think about that as a fact.
Okay.
Tom with AICCU, and I guess to Robert's point, we ask for their preference. We don't necessarily have to follow their preference, but I think, you know, there's enough folks that put down no preference that we can, you know, accommodate 1 or 2 years terms for them to have it somewhat, you know, balanced, correct?
So for landing on going with preferences.
I agree. Let's look at what happens when we go with the preferences and then adjust.
Okay. So Sydney, if you don't mind, let's put in yes, we'll do the final term limits there. If I counted correctly, I believe we have 6 people who are currently in green who selected 3 years. So those will be the 6 candidates who have 3-year terms. Why don't we proceed with next selecting 5 candidates for 2-year terms? And let's just take out the last one, the last blue candidate under advocacy. There we go. So it looks like we have 1, 2, 3 candidates who selected 2-year terms. So we need to have 2 additional candidates who have a 2-year term. So we're gonna be patient now, and we're gonna figure this out. Danielle, would you mind putting the following names in? Is the brown paper bag or hat?
It so is.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. So let's do this process. I will read out the names of the people who said no preference, and then you can show the name and put it in the back. If that sounds good. Okay. So first, under practitioners, we have Tanisha James. Thank you. And Brian Bedford. All right, so that concludes for the practitioners. Under community organizations, we have 3 people who selected no preference. We have Meredith Curry.
So the practitioners are going to be mixed in with community organizers?
I think so, because we're not stratifying by group. I think we'll be fine.
Got it. Okay. So Curry.
So Meredith Curry, and then we have Patricia Chavez. And Marcos Montes. And then under advocacy organizations, we had 1 person with no preference, and that was Sasha Perez.
Got it.
So now what we need is 1 person to draw 2 names out of the bag. That will become a 2-year term, and the remainder of the people will then have a 1-year term. Does that match the process? That makes sense? Okay.
So just a clarification. So for the ones that are in blue, the runners up, should we just not consider terms for them at all? right? Because if somebody should be able to be seated and they want to come in, they would need to take over that person's term, right? So, okay.
That's correct. Thank you. So maybe we can log that in the notes that if we do need to work with a runner up, they would adopt the term of the person who didn't accept a spot. Okay. All right. Do we have any volunteers for who would like to pull the 2 names out of the bag?
I nominate Jerry because he's closest.
Okay.
Just like Brett. Thank you very much. So just 2? Just 2. Okay. So the first name reads as so much Curry, last name Curry.
Curry.
So she's 3 years.
She's a 2-year term.
And the last one is Montez.
Okay, so Marcos Montez also has a 2-year term. And then the remainder of the candidates who are in green will receive a 1-year term. Thank you. We spent a lot of time trying to figure out if we should do names out of a hat or random assigned numbers. So thank you for humoring us with this process.
Wonderful. All right, so now let's go ahead and go back to the slide deck. We can sort of update the previous motion to incorporate that. We've got the term length selected. How does this motion read? Does this capture what we think we want to recommend? Does it need any adjustments? If it looks okay, I'm happy to entertain a motion. Entertaining a motion?
Sure, I'll motion that, what are the words I have to say after that? This?
I
Do I have to read the whole thing?
Thank you. So John Petz is forwarding a motion as displayed on our screen today. Do I have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Javier. That's a second. And Sydney, would you help us with the roll call vote?
Sure. Jerry Winkler,
Yes.
Thomas Wu,
Yes.
Robert Tagorda,
Yes.
John Hetz,
Yes.
Javier Romero.
Yes.
All right, so the tally is 5 votes for yes. That's everyone that's in the room. That means that we have no one who's had yes with reservations, no, or abstentions. So the motion carries. Phew, thank you. So that's our first slate of candidates. We're going to repeat this whole process, but let's give ourselves a 5-minute recess. Thank you.
So just to let folks on Zoom know, we're going into a 5-minute recess. So we're going to just turn off the camera and mute the conference room, and we'll reconvene in 5 minutes.
Sorry, we're a little bit trying to get back. Okay, and we're back. So the next step here is to go through a similar process and work through the selection of the Data and Tools Advisory Board candidate specific candidates. Okay. Thank you. So we're going to follow the same process now for Data and Tools. Like the other one, we're selecting 16 candidates. So the spreadsheet will look familiar, but let me just flag a few things. For practitioners, we received a very high number of applications for practitioners. I just wanted to acknowledge that. And we, in this case, had a tied average rubric results, the average rankings between the 8th and 9th place. So that's why those two names are in a lighter green. So I wanted to indicate the number of slots that we are recommending for practitioners is 8, but that there was a tie there. So that's something for you to consider and discuss. The other things I wanted to flag, and then again, we'll take 5 minutes in a moment for you to just take a look at this. We do have one individual under practitioners from the California Department of Education, which is currently represented on the governing, has a permanent seat on the governing board. Would you like to scroll a little bit? Under students and families, I also just wanted to clarify that we received only one application for the Data and Tools application for a candidate that we categorized as students and families. So this is a graduate student at the University of California, Los Angeles. Something for us to discuss at the end of the conversation, perhaps, is encouraging applications from students and families. To clarify, in the community engagement slate that we just discussed, we did not receive any applications in that category. Although many people who representing a certain organization also mentioned their experience as either a parent or a student. Then in community organizations, we were recommending 2 slots, and you can see the results of your scoring here. And then under research organizations, recommended 3, and you can see the results of the scoring here. Again, under research organizations, we have 3 potential runners up because there was a tie for the second runner-up spot. And then under advocacy organizations, we were recommending 2 slots for advocacy organizations, and you can see the results of your scoring here for the advocacy organizations. So unless there are any clarifying questions, I was going to recommend we again take about 5 minutes for you to refer to your notes from the scoring process or the public comment period, and then we can start discussion. And feel free to ask to scroll up and down as we discuss these candidates. So it looks like we have a tie to break in the practitioner box. Right?
I'm curious, Tom, with AICCU, for the practitioners, there's obviously a lot of people's names that are not on there that had submitted. Are those people? Are we able to consider those people that aren't named on there as well?
That's your decision. So what we are showing are the people who have the highest average rankings, but we're not displaying all the multiple dozens. I'm trying to remember how many applications we had for this board. We did not display them all because we thought it would provide more clarity to just narrow it down and work from the work that people did in advance. That being said, if there's a gap you identify, where you see we really need someone with the following perspective, you could go back to your list of the full applications and see if there's someone that you would recommend bringing in. Any initial observations or clarifying questions? If I can provide one clarification that I neglected at the beginning, I noted that there was one employee of the California Department of Education. If you scroll down to research organizations, please, Sydney. One of the runners up, Jacob Jackson, is employed by PPIC. And we currently have Sujin Hess, PPIC, on the governing board as well. So I wanted to provide that. Londe. Oh, Londe, I'm sorry. Yes, Londe, sorry, from PPIC is on the governing board. So I wanted to provide that clarification since I've done so for CDE as well.
So in Jacob's case, he is here listed as a runners-up, while Liberty Bend Naughton is part of the recommended slate.
She is a practitioner.
So that left again.
The third one, yeah, I'm still back. Existing members, board members, and representatives. state as well. I recommend this.
Point of clarification, John has politics. Outright is actually a college. It's state like college. It is a college.
All right, so how about we start with the discussion with just the overall distribution of just say the numbers of practitioners, students and families, community organizations, research organizations, advocacy organizations. So it appeared to be a really good distribution. The last round we only had 3 categories that we were looking at. So do we need to make any adjustments here in terms of the 8, 1, 2, 3, and 2 interval with, I think earlier we had talked about the potential to be a little bit more heavier on the practitioner side because this is the data and tools advisory board. I'm looking around the room and not seeing a lot of objection or.
Yeah, I am sorry.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, Javier Romero, ED. With CDE practitioners, it's like they're the lone state. It's not bad. Just my preference is that keep it as that's pretty much the pattern thus far. It's
I would obviously disagree.
Right.
Yeah, I know Liberty personally, and I think she would be an incredible addition to this committee.
Yeah, I don't doubt Liberty would. I would say the same thing if I saw an EDD person.
John, that's Kelvin Q. Collins. So, Jerry, you know her personally. Doesn't that suggest that there's possible relationships that we don't want to get involved in? If that's
No, it doesn't, because Liberty has different skills. And I think her skills really lend themselves to this particular subcommittee. And I would rely on her to help this group head in the right direction.
So that's my concern right there. Is to have somebody come in from the State Department that lead the direction. I would like it to be an emergent, it's be an emergent process where solutions are arrived from the group, led by any one of our departments.
Well, and I didn't say lead, I said help. She should help. And I think it would be helpful to have this group, this practitioner group right here, which is why I think it's heavy on the practitioners to help with the data and tools subcommittee, help steer that committee with experience. And as a governing board member, I'm going to be a lot more comfortable if this subcommittee is basically has the right skills and experience to choose the proper direction.
Yeah, I just think that posture, if we all took that posture, I think we would bog the process down with that posture. EDD, who knows limitations on the base wage, so I want somebody there that might, I think any other department would say.
I'm not following you.
So I think the question, John Hans California Colleges, I think the question that here is raising is then shouldn't we all have someone that knows the statewide data metrics? Shouldn't each one of our organizations have that? Right? Essentially, you're saying you would like someone from CDE to be able to advise this review for shouldn't.
That's not exactly what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I want the most qualified, experienced people with the best skills to be on this subcommittee. That's what I really want, because as a governing board member, I want to be able to trust the recommendations of the subcommittee for the data and tools that are being recommended.
And if Liberty is not there, you would not trust the outcome of that group.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is of the people that we were given choices of, I think Liberty is absolutely somebody that belongs on the subcommittee, whether she's from CDE or someplace else.
So as you stated before, Marianne, the fact that we had people that were applying that were employed by the organizations that are already represented on the governing board, they weren't provided a preference either way in the scoring. Right? We flagged this as a question for all of you to consider when we sent you the applications. But that's correct. We shared all of the applications with those who were scoring, and individual scorers made their own decisions about how to score individuals.
My Tom with AICC, my thought, at least about the practitioners, is there seems to be a lack of higher education, post-secondary on this list, as we see here. No UC, no one from the private nonprofit higher education sector. And no, seems to be very K-12 heavy as well. So, I would like to see that balanced a bit more. I vaguely remember there was some thought, I think that was presented earlier in the meeting that I think was it the goal to have at least one from the UC, CSU, community colleges, CSU, and hopefully, I would make the pitch for a nonprofit higher education representative as well.
So what did the applications look like? Did we, perhaps not receive very many or any? Yes, so these categories. So I'm happy to share some information if that's helpful. There are 4 additional practitioners who were selected in the rankings, whose ranking scores were not high enough to be one of the 3. One was from San Diego State University with an average rank of 8.5. One was from the University of California, Davis with an average rank of 9.5. And then, let's see, one was from Chabot Los Positos, CCD, with an average rank of 10.5, and one from Fresno State with an average rank of 10.5. Noting your question about University of California, the applicant from University of California, Davis was Brendan Livingston. You could, explore his application in your files if you would like to.
There was someone from Stanford University, Jessica Sharpness, I believe.
Yes, there was an applicant from Stanford University named Jessica Sharpness, who was not selected as one of the top 8 choices by the ad hoc committee members who did the ranking, but her application is in your packet. Thank you. So the way that the review and the scoring process worked was we were looking at the best to fill out, to be a part of the advisory board, not necessarily, top in the category. Is that correct? That is correct. We did not, your Google form did not break out the practitioners
by these groups. So the ad hoc committee members who scored the practitioners scored them as one large set. And although we suggested, look for representation across, as you can see from the average results, that did not result in someone from either a nonprofit or or UC being in the top 8. So again, we can consider process improvements at the end. If you would prefer that, for example, if it's a very high priority to ensure, we could stratify that process in the future to say, select amongst CSU, select amongst 4 years community colleges K-12, which would avoid this.
But then I also think that we get into potentially get into a situation where we're almost, slotting and almost being a little bit too rigid in the out years of the replacements, right? Maybe not necessarily getting the best, but just looking for specific representation. So that, kind of pros and cons on that. One way maybe to approach this might be in looking at the terms that the K-12 practitioners are serving, and maybe dividing those terms up a little bit to be able to rotate some additional openings in out years. So just some things to think about. Please let us know if we need to scroll the list at all.
Don't have stuff from colleges. I can share Tom's concern with this list being K-12 unrepresented. I do also think that question Ron about conflict of interest. So Liberty Management's position currently is directly funded with Cradle-to-Career data system funds. Is that put her in a conflict of interest position, serving on an advisory board that would serving on an advisory committee that would be advised, she's funded by funds that are flowing through this.
I'm not sure of the factual assumption that the funding is in any way other than it being taxpayer state of California. I'm not aware of any legal conflict of interest.
Okay, because she just stated that in her application that she is directly funded with Cradle-to-Career data system.
Oh, she is. Okay. I'm sorry for that actual update. In that is her employment dollars. Is she a civil servant to the best of your knowledge? Assuming she's a civil servant, there shouldn't be any additional ethical conflict of interest implications.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ron, for that clarification. So do we have a suggestion for how we would like to approach? What would be our next steps here? We do have an acknowledgement that the practitioners are sort of K-12 heavy. With one way to be able to resolve this through the stratification of the terms, be acceptable to this group. Or would we like to reach down and open up the candidate pool and look at sort of the lower rankings to see if there's somebody we might want to pull up into this group? Some more additional work there. I mean, I think I tried to frame it at the outset a little bit about not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. We'll make it as good as we all want it to be, right?
What about using that as the tiebreaker and putting Tamika Connor on, being that she's from higher ed?
And so Jerry, you're saying pull Tamika Connor up to?
So there's a tie between Tamika Connor and Chris Persons.
Okay.
Tamika being from community colleges, Chris being from K-12.
Okay.
If we want it to be more higher ed
we at least
use
get to
that as a
incorporate
tiebreaker.
that. So is that agreeable to include Tamika for her post-secondary?
Robert's word of revival strategy. I concur with that. Because I think we have to apply the same criteria that we did in the last one and think about institutional balance as represented in this particular advisory group. And then my question would be, if we were to try to go down further to find a higher ed, another higher ed representative, how much farther down we have to go? Because I worry about obviously the quality of the candidates as well.
Diane's taking a look for us.
I'm happy to provide some information if that's helpful. So the last person displayed on your screen here is Anthony Davis with an average rubric result score of 8. The next one would be Jean Stronach from San Diego State University with a score of 8.5. After Jean is Brendan Livingston from the University of California, Davis with a score of 9.5.
If we have the opportunity, being that they're just 1 or 2 points below what we're showing here on the screen, we have the opportunity to elevate those two. How do we feel about that?
Where were they from?
Jean Stronach from San Diego State University and Brendan Livingston from University of California, Davis. And if the group would like a minute to review the applications, we can provide that. Helpful.
San Diego
Office of Education. K-12.
Yeah, as opposed
San
to
Diego State. Laurel.
Oh, San Diego State, sorry, I misread.
There's 2 San Diegos in there.
Yeah, so maybe that reason, the UC Davis one.
Brendan Livingston is from the University of California, Davis.
That might be an opportunity to bring some Northern California experience into this. Right?
Then who would we remove? Who would we switch that person to?
Yeah, that's our next question. Yeah. You know, it seems like we have somebody from San Diego State and San Diego Office of Education, maybe one of the, maybe John Watson could be swapped out, or the UC Davis candidate to provide the post-secondary piece. Northern California also.
The risk is anything a good replacement for the Department of Education. So I think we all feel better about it. Swap those two out. It's not been against the military, of course. It's just for the consistency of what we have thus far.
I would continue to disagree. I understand that this looks K-12 heavy, but you have to understand that the data that's going into the system is also K-12 heavy.
So, you know, trying to get to a both and. Is there a way for us to consider changing or reducing one of the other categories while including Liberty, while including the UC perspective? So I think out of what we have left here, we have students, 1 in students and family, 2 in community organizations, 3 in research, and then 2 in advocacy. So it seems to me that perhaps it's research or advocacy that drops in order to increase the 1 in practitioners.
If not, my first suggestion, I would go back on the second one, compare to San Diego. Swapping out Office of Education, County Office of Education, San Diego with.
I think I need to sort of see what the current proposal looks like before we move further. So. Roll up and add some names here. Or add some lines.
Or which for practitioner, adding Brendan.
Is that our UC Davis
Do you just want me to add him like right here?
talk about Brandon as a weekly speak, is that right?
Yeah, it's just in Brendan, San Diego Office of Education, John Watson goes to replace that position. I would hate to thin out those other groups.
Yeah, is there any opposition to that suggestion?
I'm still voice concern because of the score that Brendan got. For starters, I'm not entirely opposed to that. I did want to ask, where's Roberta from?
Oh, sorry, thank you. Roberta is from National Student Clearinghouse.
So is she one of our out-of-state?
Correct. She's in the Washington, DC area.
The one thought would be to
Not on the no-fly list yet, right?
Correct. Correct.
So one thought would be to drop that down to 2 and make the practitioner list a little bit larger.
My preference would be to grab somebody from blue from that group.
For the research organization?
Yes.
Okay.
John Haskell from community colleges. Can I clarify? So was Jacob moved down?
Yeah, that was my next question too.
So was he moved down because he's an employee of the board member?
No, we didn't move him today, no.
That may be an error. Thank you for identifying that. Let me double check.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Sorry. Disregard me over here.
All right, Ariane's checking for
I'm
us.
double checking.
I see what you're saying.
Thank you for identifying that. I apologize. That is an error. He should, Roberta Highland and Jacob Jackson's orders should be reversed. Thank you for identifying that. His average rank is 3.3.
So John Haskell from community colleges. I'd like to suggest that if we're going to move forward with members who are with a slate that contains members of organizations that have representation on the board, consider assigning them a one-year term and taking that conversation to the full board for a conversation about whether or not we want to continue with that policy since it wasn't clear in the solicitations. So if we decided as a full group to continue to allow that, then obviously those people could, those candidates could reapply after their one-year term.
I actually think that's a very reasonable suggestion because I think that based on the conversation here, we have folks that feel very strongly one way and very strongly another way, and this would allow the opportunity for the full board to have that conversation. Is that amenable to you, Jerry?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay, so I've lost track now. Do we have more people in green than we need, or what?
It's still the same number of people.
Did we resolve our tiebreakers and all that good stuff? So we have our 16.
Well, we did not resolve. So are we moving Brendan Livingston? Are we not substitute? Are we like moving him up and then moving someone down for practitioners? Is it John Watson?
That was my suggestion.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone had feedback on that one.
John has come from community college, so I will second that suggestion as a way to balance it and maintain the general representation that we are trying for in practitioners in particular.
So a little bit more distribution among K-12 and post-secondary. Do we have any objections to that? And so we've had a lot of movement in the last few minutes. I'd like to just give everybody a couple minutes just to review where we're at. So if you can take a minute or two just to look at the groups that are in green versus the ones that are considering runners up, right, in blue.
And so just to confirm, the folks who are current employees of governing board entities will be assigned a one-year term limit. I just want to confirm that.
I believe that was the consensus in the room. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to mark that for now, just so we have that placeholder there.
And that's also Jake Jackson.
Yes. Yeah.
That would make Chris Persons also included. Yes.
Yes.
Quite right.
Yes.
It's not a, we broke that tie because we wanted to put Chris.
And then I think just like previously, John has come from community colleges. I think the person that was shifted down should be the first alternate.
Okay.
First one.
Thank you, John. Yes.
Sorry, here are the scores.
Scroll down.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and scroll down to the other categories. Scroll down one more time, and I'll make the change to Jacob Jackson as well. Oh, I think we're trying to close the page. No, I'll fix that.
I'm wondering if it's necessary to have, because we have ties. I was thinking we have more runners up in some of these categories than we have the candidate. sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just noticing that in some cases we have more runners-ups than the seats.
Oh, wow.
But I realize now that we have some ties up there, so scheduling the day, it's hard to follow some of the stuff. All right, do we need more time, or how do we feel about this group here as far as geographic distribution, distribution across the different categories that we've talked about today? It's not an easy conversation, so I appreciate our ability to kind of find a happy middle ground, right? Be able to have the both and. I think if we're at that point, we can go ahead and go back to the slide deck and consider a potential motion. We have a draft motion for the Data and Tools Advisory Board. I think we may need to update the number of runners up. I just want to make sure we've got the right count.
Sorry to make everyone dizzy. Give me 1 second.
All right. So the motion that we have, or the resolution as worded, is very similar to the one that we looked at for community engagement. Satisfied with wording, the verbiage? There's someone that would like to move this resolution?
Tom with AICCU. I move.
All right, I've got Tom with the first. Anyone with the second?
Javier ED, I'll second.
Javier on the second. Sydney, would you do the honors of roll call vote for us? Jerry Winkler?
Yes.
Thomas Wu,
Yes.
Robert Tagorda,
Yes.
John Hetz,
Yes.
Javier Romero.
Yes.
Thank you. So with that tally, we have 5 for yes, that being the same number that's in the room. We do not have any yes with reservations, no, and no abstentions. With a vote of 5 and majority, that's our majority, and the motion carries. So let's go ahead and consider the term lengths now, and we'll go through a very similar process.
So by my count, but let's look at this together. We currently have 6 people who have requested a 3-year term. We have Jason Morgan and Laura Owen. We have Tamika Connor. We have Reagan Faust and Heather Q. Am I right that that's 6? So as well,
and Mikash ready.
Yes. So is that 7? That's 7 people? Okay.
6. Because we just added. Oh, yeah, we just added.
6, great. So as with the other slate, if you agree, we can proceed with those 6 as having a 3-year term. And then we'll next go to selecting who will have a 2-year term. I currently see one individual who requested a 2-year term, that's Lisa Chavez. And then we'll need to put the remaining names in a hat and select an additional 4 names to serve a 2-year term. And then the remainder will serve a 1-year term. Does that sound right? Okay, so let's put the remaining names who have no preference into a hat. So let's start with Alex Adams. Next, we have Amber Jacobo. And then we have Brendan Livingston. Jennifer Orlick. Okay. Going down to students and families, we have Davis Vo. Under community organizations, we have Kathy Huang. And think, nope. Okay, so under research organizations, everyone already has a term. Under advocacy, we would have Marshall Anthony Jr. Okay, so now we should have all of this with no preference, and let's select 4 names for 2-year terms.
I feel like Jerry got really excited. He got really excited about that.
She said there were crumbs.
First one. Livingston.
Okay, so that's Brendan Livingston for a 2-year term.
The second is Anthony Jr.
Marshall Anthony Jr. for a 2-year term. Huang. Kathy Huang, 2-year term.
And last one is Orlick.
Okay, Jennifer Orlick for a 2-year term. And then that leaves the following people with a 1-year term: Alex Adams, Amber Jacobo, Davis Vo, and I believe that's it. So should we double check? Is that 5 1-year terms? I believe so.
And then we agreed that Jacob Jackson from PPIC and Liberty Van Natten from CDE will serve 1-year terms as well.
Thank you.
I'm John Hens, California Community Colleges. I'm a little bit concerned that our single student and family representative on the committee has a 1-year term. So I would suggest that we might consider undoing the randomness slightly in that case, just to make sure we're not left with no representative.
Would you recommend?
But he or she can apply, right? Reapply.
That's true. That's a good point.
Is there a recommendation to make a change, or would you suggest?
That's what I was recommending, but Jerry makes a good point. That they think it's
To my understanding, we haven't defined anything, that there's no restrictions on people reapplying.
Yeah, I would also just note that that was one of the categories where we had the least number of candidates. So when we go through our reflection process about this whole, process, that we're going to need to do a lot more recruiting for this particular categories. Okay. Satisfied? Some nods in the room. So I'll go back to the potential motion here. We have a draft motion before you. Just take a minute to read that and ensure that that's worded in a way that's consistent with the thinking here in the room. Happy to consider a motion when you're ready. Okay, so I have a first on the motion before us from Javier Romero. Do I have a second?
Robert Tagorda.
Robert Tagorda with a second. Thank you, Robert. Sydney, would you go ahead and do a roll call vote for us?
Jerry Winkler,
Yes.
Thomas Fu,
Yes.
Robert Tagorda,
Yes.
John Hetz,
Yes.
Javier Romero.
Yes.
I think I said Javier Romero, sorry.
Yeah.
I just changed her whole name.
I'll let it go this time.
Oh my gosh. All the votes are in.
All the votes are in and our tally is 5 for yes, and that is the majority in the room. It's a majority of our ad hoc committee here. So I'm seeing no votes, no other votes. So this motion carries with that majority vote. All right. Now, I took the liberty of preparing this additional motion based on the discussion earlier today in regards to recommending further discussion on this particular point. Please take a minute to read through that. Happy to make some adjustments on the fly here. Perhaps it's not recommending terms, perhaps it's setting guidelines, perhaps it's addressing it in a different way, maybe in the recruitment process. I'm not quite sure that the wording is right.
I guess I'm just unclear what exactly the specific motion is for.
Well, we had some discussion and there was concern about representation, additional representation from governing board members to become also representatives on the advisory boards. Right? And it, we sort of resolved it here for this initial slate by using the term lengths, but it seemed like it was worthy of a larger discussion with the full board. At least that's kind of how I heard it.
I'm totally open to others' thoughts on this, but perhaps making it a bit more broad than just reviewing the pros and cons of the governing board representation on the advisory boards. So no, not just specifically looking at the terms, but just broadly, just having a fuller discussion about that. But if others have other thoughts, I'm totally amenable to that.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, so I've updated it with this work better. It's a little bit more broad. The advisory board ad hoc committee recommends reviewing the pros and cons of governing board representation on advisory boards at the May 11th governing board meeting.
Now that's California Community Colleges. I concur with that change. I think that's a good recommendation, especially since after this decision cycle, the terms really aren't going to matter. Right. So I think this more general setup, I think serves the board. I think that's nice.
Happy to entertain a motion.
Robert Tagorda.
Thank you, Robert. I've got Robert with the first for referring to the full board, the recommendation before us. Do I have a second? Thank you, Tom, for the second. With that, we have hopefully our final roll call vote. Sydney?
Jerry Winkler.
Yeah.
Thomas Wu.
Yes.
Robert Tagorda.
Yes.
John Hetz.
Yes.
Javier Romero.
Yes.
All right, with 5 votes, that is our majority. That's the full number of ad hoc committee members that are in the room present today. So that motion carries. On to the next slide. Marianne.
Sure. So let me just first pause by saying it's 3:48 and I am astonished that we have accomplished what we needed to prior to 4 p.m. So many thanks to you for a very efficient decision-making process. We thought we would just spend the last few minutes. If you have any lessons learned or reflections you'd like to share in this format, feel free to. You might have further thoughts after going home and thinking about this some more, so you know where to find us. But just thought it'd be helpful to think about any lessons learned that you have, either from the work that you did prior to today's meeting, the process we used in the meeting itself, recruitment of candidates and the mix of applications that we received. We got a very high number of applications. Was it the mix that we were hoping for? What could we do differently? So if there are any reflections that you'd like to share at this point, feel free and we'll take some notes. And then would also really welcome any other reflections you have in the future if you'd like to share those. Let's open it up.
Robert Tagorda, Revival Strategy. First, I want to thank the staff for all of the hard work. It was a really structured process, thoughtful process, and I think reflective of the kind of organization we want to run. Going through it the first time, there are going to be some hiccups and there are going to be some challenges, but I think it really reflects the general direction of where the board wants to take this process. So I commend the staff for all of the hard work in putting this together for us. I think there are some glaring gaps that we would want to address. Specifically, the one representation for students and families. It's a challenge, I think, to consider outreaching on this kind of an issue with families. And it's a much bigger issue than just representation in that advisory. But I think this has to be part of the way that we communicate with the broader public about the work that we're doing. And ensuring that it's something that we can gain the expertise of families and students in this process and in this work. So I wanted to make sure I flag that. And then I think the other is that we want to make sure that the criteria that we apply are sort of across the board. We didn't really get a chance to calibrate how we would score and rank, obviously because of time constraints and where we needed to go. We had to, someone has to go through it the first time. But I think that is ultimately where we want to be as an organization. We want to make sure that if we have a rubric, that we're interpreting it in a certain way where we can achieve some consistency. Because obviously, as an applicant reviewer, I know how I was interpreting a 3 or a 5 or a 4, but not necessarily how others would. So something along those lines. Maybe it's John's algorithm or whatever it is that might help us in the future. But I think that's something that I want to raise as a potential lesson learned as well.
Thank you, Robert. Questions? Robert.
John Hanson, California Community Intelligence. Just to be clear, I did not volunteer to design the algorithm.
That's not what the minutes say. Sorry.
So I want to second my general concern about the lack of applications from students. I think there are a variety of things. I know, throughout higher ed, there are student organizations that solicit. I'm sure there must be student family organizations that CE can help solicit. We need more so that we have a good representation of your selected from. Also, I want to raise two things that Thomas raised earlier. I do think we want to make sure that we have better representation of workforce related organizations in the future to make sure that we're reaching out specifically to them to apply to these advisory boards, as well as to members of the general higher ed outside of public ed. I think I was struck by the lack of representation of those institutions throughout. So I think we have to be more directive in our recruitment. And then the other thing I would suggest, or the other reflection I had, is as I read through candidates, there are some that I know and some that I don't know. And I was struck by the unevenness of the applications among some of the people that I knew who did not represent themselves well in the application process. So I think we might want to think about how we are structuring the questions that we are asking candidates to make sure that we're getting evenness in what they supply. Some candidates were very thorough in their answers. Some candidates were less thorough, and I think the nature of the method may have led some people to be a little less formal and thus not represent their qualification.
Right, perhaps instructions, FAQ.
Something like that, or samples. I mean, I think there are ways that we can help support folks to make sure that they're putting their best.
Tom.
Yeah, Tom with AICC. I think to pick up on something that John mentioned just now, he knows a lot of folks that applied. I know a lot of the folks that applied. I'm sure we all know, at least some that had applied. I guess in the back of my mind, as I was going through this was, is there a potential conflict if, I pushed harder or I scored someone harder or higher, excuse me, would there be that perspective of a conflict of interest, if I pushed for someone that I know, not necessarily because, I, like that person or whatever, but, I do strongly believe that, that person is highly qualified, but, if I had pushed that person, if that could be perceived as a conflict of interest. because I've worked with that person before, or what have you. So if I don't know if there's a way to structure it so with clearer instructions, if that is okay, or if it's not okay, or if potential scorers could volunteer that we know this person, can someone else review, just clear instructions on how something like that could be handled in the future.
And I would just express appreciation again for the staff. This was a lot of work, guys. We really do appreciate it. And I think as far as lessons learned goes, I would say, we do want a broad representation on these committees. So we should probably specify upfront a little bit more about, we need UC, CSU, et cetera, represented. We absolutely have to do some recruitment in the student and families area, and just some of the other pieces. And I think I'm looking forward to the first year to educate us as to who else we might need in these subcommittees.
Absolutely.
So first year is always the best.
Javier, did you have an additional comment?
No, I just had a second. It's already been said. Be intentional. If we intend to have a broad mix, we can have balance and stay at the front. Maybe some guiding principles, which are saying when we do it for these data purposes. Just have that front, so it becomes the lens in which we review our roles here.
So thank you very much for that. If I can just share back what I heard, and perhaps we can report some of this back out to the full board at the May 11th meeting. So heard a need for directed outreach to ensure that we can think about representation. There were a number of comments related to representation, especially with the focus on students and families, it being a broader issue. Some ideas of tapping into existing student family organizations, more representation on the questions of workforce and higher ed outside of public higher ed, and to explore ways to structure the process intentionally around that representation. And then on the review, heard a desire for support and really consistently applying criteria across the board, consistently applying the rubric across different scores, and to clarify how an individual scorer's knowledge of an individual candidate should or shouldn't factor in. And then structuring the questions to support applicants in representing their qualifications well and really putting their best foot forward. So happy to take that into consideration. I also think there's an opportunity, the work that we're doing in year one is going to be different from the work we'll be doing in years 2, 3, and 4. And so perhaps as we project, like, here's what we're going to need in the next 2 years, that can help shape how we scope out our recruitment and our application and review efforts. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Marianne, for helping us walk through that reflective process. And I just want to sort of second the notion that's already been said multiple times. This is a lot of work. So not just for the office staff, but also definitely for the ad hoc committee members, which we barely have our majority here today. But thank you. I mean, really, this is difficult work. It really requires a certain amount of dedication and passion to this particular project. And I sort of feel like I'm sort of expanding this sort of brotherhood, sisterhood of folks that are really interested, engaged, and want to see the STEM system happen. And so that's just a really exciting place for all of us. So I think we've had a really productive meeting today, and I want to get really close. It's really close to 4. So we've reached the end of our scheduled agenda items, and we've had some public participation, which was really great to hear public comment. Of course, these meetings are open to the public as per Beckley Keene, and we have invited the public to come and make comments. And if there are no objections, I'd like to adjourn the meeting. Seeing none, I'd just like to thank everyone once again for your participation and effort on this ad hoc committee. And we'll see you again soon. Thank you so much. This meeting's adjourned.